Hi, I'm Admiral, and in this video I'll be returning to the Pokemon Explained series to break down type effectiveness. That's right, we're finally returning to structured content. This is probably the single most basic and straightforward mechanic in the games, but whenever people ask me what they can do to improve as players, my biggest piece of advice has always been to learn type matchups. However, that can feel a bit silly if you don't know how type effectiveness works to begin with, since that kind of informs the importance of type matchups. So you could consider this the first of two parts on the type chart. If people want, I'll make a second part where I go through each type and its interactions with the other types. As always, I'll be going through this using our old friend, the Wawa. What it is, how it works, and the ways that we can use it to be better players. To start, type effectiveness is a term that we use specifically to refer to the way that the game calculates damage based on two factors: the type of the offensive move used, and the type or types of the defending Pokemon. As moves only have one type, this only gets a bit complex when you factor in the type combination of the receiving Pokemon, but that really belongs in the how section. Luckily for you, the how begins now. Type effectiveness essentially applies a multiplier to damage calculations based on the type matchup. To illustrate this, let's use a very basic example. A Fire-type move would do half as much damage, or 0.5 times its damage, against a Water-type, because Water resists Fire. This becomes a resisted, or not very effective, attack. However, a Fire-type move would do twice as much damage, or 2 times its usual damage, against a Grass-type, because Grass is weak to Fire. We call that a super effective hit. If a type is neither weak to, nor resists the type of the move used against it, there's no change. We refer to those as neutral hits. This math changes slightly when you factor in Pokemon with two types, but it doesn't change by much. Essentially, the effectiveness just considers two types instead of one. If both defending types are weak to the type of the move used, you end up not doing twice the damage, but 4 times as much damage instead. Players usually refer to this as a quad weakness, though sometimes I clumsily refer to it as being double weak, since two types are weak. So, for example, a Salamence would essentially be staring down 360 damage from Ice Beam, other factors notwithstanding, because both its Dragon and Flying types are weak to Ice, and Ice Beam has a base power of 90. There's a lot of other math that goes into damage calcs, so please just accept this as an extremely simplified example. The same holds true for resistances. A Pokemon whose types both resist a move used against it will take a quarter of the damage it normally would instead of half. A quad resistance, if you will. So using a grass move, let's say Giga Drain, against a Forretress would only do 18.75 points of damage. Again, extremely simple. Things get a bit more interesting when you factor in mixed effectiveness, but it's not that much more interesting. If one defensive type resists a move while the other is weak, the move does neutral damage. That is, nothing changes. If one neither resists nor is weak to the offensive move, while the other has a resistance or weakness, then the game treats it as a single weakness or resistance. That is, it will only do twice as much damage or half as much damage. The last thing to consider is type immunities. These just make it so that offensive moves do no damage. There are a handful of these, and it's important to know that even if the Pokemon is a dual type, it does not matter what the interaction is with the other type. An immunity will always negate the move. This applies to status moves too, so a move like Thunder Wave won't affect a ground type, and Toxic won't affect steel types. Some types have weird, more specific interactions with status moves and statuses too, but I can go over that another time. I kind of lied when I said that type immunity is the last thing to consider, because I just remembered that some abilities can, in a very technical way, add resistances and immunities to a Pokemon that normally wouldn't have them. One of the more common abilities with this effect is Thick Fat, which halves the damage taken from Fire and Ice type moves. So, a Pokemon like Hariyama with Thick Fat would essentially resist Fire and Ice, despite the fighting type not naturally resisting moves of those kinds. Another example is Levitate, which makes users immune to ground-type moves and some entry hazards. These abilities are a bit more niche and require prior knowledge to effectively play around, since the game tends not to tell you opponent abilities beforehand, but it's definitely worth a mention here. Now that we know what type effectiveness is and how it factors into damage calculation, let's get into the ways that we can use it to be better players. This should be pretty obvious pretty immediately. The more damage you do, the better. Therefore, you should always target opponent weaknesses whenever possible. Factoring in elements like stab and weather alongside type effectiveness can make damage numbers go absolutely crazy, and that's not even considering stat changes. One sword stance can make those numbers go even crazier. I remember being a little too young to really get type matchups and damage effectiveness beyond the basics of grass, fire, and water, playing Sapphire on my Game Boy Advance, and wondering why on earth I couldn't beat Tate and Liza with my Blaziken. Suffice to say that, while I did somehow finish Sapphire, poor, overworked Blaziken was almost level 90 by that point. Knowing how to maximize your damage output can push inexperienced players through the early game, even if they only know a few type interactions. You probably won't need to know that fire resists fairy when you're just starting out, but you can absolutely benefit from knowing that fire beats grass. For experienced players, those early fights are made even more trivial. On the other side of that, the later parts of the game can be made far more difficult if you don't know how to optimize your damage. See again my previously mentioned struggles. If I'd just known to grab a Sharpedo, as both its water and dark stab moves would do super effective damage into their Soul Rock and Lunatone, both of which are dual rock and psychic types, that fight would have been trivial. Understanding the importance of type effectiveness should help you when building your team, too. Making sure you have a variety of offensive move types, while securing crucial stab, can help you stay prepared for just about anything. A minor level disadvantage can be easily overcome with smart move selection and equally smart defensive pivoting. A major level disadvantage might need a status condition or 3, but that's not the point. Knowing how to play around type effectiveness can help you assemble a team with balance in its offensive and defensive capabilities, compensating for and covering each other's weaknesses. And that just about does it for this video. Like I said, this is a very simple and very straightforward mechanic, but an absolutely essential one to know. Mastering the fundamentals is crucial to improvement at anything, and Pokémon is no exception. Getting your damage numbers up is the simplest way to win battles, and considering you need to win at least 13 between the 8 standard badges, Elite Four, and Champion, improving your damage output gets you to that goal much faster. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and let me know in the comments. If you're interested in a follow-up video to this, where I break down the whole type chart, God help me, then you should absolutely leave a comment about that too. On top of that, I'm looking for an excuse to play Emerald again, so drop suggestions if you have any. And if you're not subscribed yet, you should absolutely consider doing so. I'm still working on finding a balance with my streaming content to include Pokémon, and I already know that I'll be doing a Pokémon-related stream as soon as I finish Ultra Sun, so keep an eye on my channel post for that announcement, though it will certainly be in the Ultra Sun video too. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.